I have this other partial box of Hornady 38 cal 158 grain hollow points. And you can tell from the box they've been hanging around for just a little while. So I need to do something with these, and I'm going to. I started on this a couple of days ago. I got distracted with other things, but I'm using a couple of different die sets for this project. I started using the Hornady carbide sizing die that's in this older set. I cleaned up. I get stuff from like estates or whatever. And a lot of times, you may find this hard to believe, but guys don't always clean their dies. So I cleaned them up and they're fine. But I also had hanging around this Lyman sizing die, the All-American sizer. And I don't know what year Lyman brought these out, but the All-American turret press, that's this guy right here. That's the original All-American. Now Lyman has what they call their All-American. It's an 8-station turret press. It's pretty cool. Actually, it looks like they sort of copied the Reading, but they made it 8 instead of 7 stations, so it's a little bit bigger. It's a nice press. Regardless, so I cleaned up this die, which was the Lyman All-American, because I just wanted to try it. And again, that's a die that probably hadn't been cleaned in 40 years. So I just used the same thing I used to clean my guns. I mean, if I happen to have some Hoppe's number 9 and some gun scrubber or break free CLP, whatever, I just grab whatever I happen to have handy that I use to clean my guns, and that's what I use to clean the dies. So I got those cleaned up, sized all the casings, and then I went to go, and I like to seat the primer and then flare the mouth in the second step. So I've got this arm here on the T7. I push it forward to seat the primer, and then I run it up to flare the mouth of the casing. And as I was withdrawing one of the casings from the expander die, now this is the Hornady, I ran into something I don't remember having happened before. Maybe it has, and I just don't remember it. But the bottom half of the case is sitting in the shell holder, and the top part of the casing is stuck on the expander die. So I grab my little mini vice grips, and I get that in there, and I squeeze these down. It's like, yeah, that's not quite tight enough. Let me go a little more. That was about my 8th try to get that removed. How do you like that? There we go. So I can't recall that happening before, having a case break apart like that in the die, but boy, am I glad it happened here at the bench and not in the gun. I just don't like gas cut in my chambers. Not that it would wreck the gun, but you know what I mean. So anyhow, I guess I could put that back in right now, but because I just wanted to finish the job that I was doing, priming, flaring, I grabbed from another die set that I happen to have sitting right nearby, a 38 Super automatic die set, and I grabbed the expander out of that. Remember, 9mm, 38 357, 38 Super automatic, and there's others that are very similar in their diameter. So I just grabbed something close. So if you run into something like that, like I just did, and you just want to keep moving and deal with it later, fine. Grab something close and you can get the job done. And it worked beautiful. Basically, all you're doing in the second step, if you're newer and you don't really understand this process or you're just learning the process, you size the casing and it squeezes down the mouth so much you can't get a projectile to go on top of it, take your fingers away, and then run it up into the seating die without it falling off. So what you do after you size the casing is you open the mouth back up and you do it just enough, and you're going to use the projectile you're going to load as your gauge as to how much flare you put on the mouth of that casing. So the idea is you open it up just enough till you set a projectile on top, It sets pretty straight up and down. You take your fingers away, it stays put, and you run it up into the seating die. The seating die that I am using here is from the Hornady set. That's an older set. And you can tell from the box, the labeling, it's been around a while. So again, after cleaning it, I set this thing up because the seating die has a seat crimp function to it. So you can do both operations in one step, seating and crimping. I personally typically prefer to seat in one operation, crimp in a second, because you can get a better result when you do it that way. But just for grins and giggles, I thought, you know what, I'm going to set this thing up to seat and crimp in one operation. So what I did was I took a casing that was sized but not flared. I put it up into the seating die. I run this up, and then I screw down the body of the die until it stops. Where it's stopping is on the mouth of the casing, not the shell holder. And that's the point at which the crimp function is going to begin. So as you run it up into the casing up into the die, the more you screw down the die, the heavier the crimp function is going to be. So this is why case length becomes more important, because I'm doing a roll crimp on here. If you have a taller casing, it's going to have I'm going to be going this way, it would have a heavier crimp. If it's a shorter casing, it would have a lighter crimp. So you are introducing a lot of inconsistency into the crimp of your ammunition when you have cases that are varying in length more than 5 thousandths. And the more out of 5 thousandths difference in case length you get, the more variation in crimp. And flaring the mouth of the casing is the same thing. A taller case has a wider flare. A shorter case has a narrower flare. So if you can get your casings within 3 thousandths of each other, that's more of an ideal setup. So I've got this good to go here. I seated a projectile after I set this up, and I did a couple, and then I grabbed my bullet puller and I pulled the bullets. Now, when I first set it up, I thought, as I looked at it visually and how I feel the crimp function taking place as it's going on inside the die. Much of reloading is by feel. Pay attention to what you feel. You cannot see what's taking place up inside a die. So as you run this up into it, pay close attention to the amount of resistance that you're experiencing. If you experience more resistance, okay, then something is going on. In this instance, it would be a heavier crimp. If you have less, then that would be a lighter crimp. Or perhaps you've got variations in the wall thickness of the casings that you're using. If you have mixed manufacturer brass, you're going to start noticing that when you go to seat the projectile as it gets pushed into the casing, remember, the outside dimension is going to be the same because the sizing die made everything on the OD, the outside diameter, identical. So if you have a thicker casing, if you have, say, one that's, say, 14 thousandths thick, and then you have the next manufacturer is 16 thousandths or so thick, you will, if you are paying attention, notice the increased tension that you experience as the projectile gets seated into that casing. So it's going to have an additional tension on the projectile. So if you can separate your casings by head stamp to keep everything as like kind as you can get, that helps with your accuracy quite a bit. And the way that shows up, by the way, on your target is vertical stringing, because you're going to vary the pressure. The variation in pressure leads to variation in velocity. And so you'll notice that if you're chronographing, right? So it prints lower or higher. If you're getting that vertical stringing, that has to do with the variation in velocity, the variation in pressure, and in part it can be from the wall thickness of the casings. Okay? So I have here all set up next because my seating die is good to go. I'm happy with the amount of crimp. And initially, by the way, it was going too heavy. And I know that because I made a couple of dummy rounds, right? I grabbed my kinetic bullet puller and I hit them on the floor. And the first couple that I did, man, I had to hit them really hard to get them to come out. It's like, nope, too heavy. So that's one of my indications. If I got to beat it half to death just to get the bullet to pull out of the kinetic bullet puller, that tells me the crimp is too heavy, back it off. Too firm wax on the floor and that bullet came right out. And that's again something you just learn by feel or when you hit a kinetic bullet puller on the floor. Now it's this industrial carpet and there's no padding, there's just concrete underneath. There's a slab underneath this carpet and it makes it pretty ideal for pulling bullets actually. And the carpet's got all kinds of indentations in it because I hit it with a kinetic bullet puller frequently. However, you will learn by how much force you use hitting your kinetic bullet puller on whatever it is you're going to hit it on to know from experience if I have to hit it harder, okay, this is just way too heavy, right? Too good firm wax or maybe one and the bullet comes out. You shouldn't like tap it and have it fall out because that basically means you have no tension on the projectile at all. You'll pick that up as time goes on. So I'm going to load this time around. If you watched the earlier video a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, that I was loading 357 Magnum, I was using up an older can of 2400. This time I'm using up a partial of Unique. And the reason I'm using up the partial of Unique instead of, I've got another partial of Bullseye I could have used too, but I'm thinking this is going to go through a revolver. And I have found that Unique has always worked really well in revolvers to give me the accuracy that I'm looking for. There's others that do well too, but I like Unique, so I'm going with that. And I'm only going to be making, for what I've got left here, like 58, 59 casings that I'm going to load. So I'm not going to take my Hollywood gun shop precision micrometer powder dispenser and fill up a great big hopper. When I got a couple of these things in one fell swoop, and the hoppers that are on them, the plastic hoppers, man, those things were just dark and they needed to be replaced. So I called Ward at Dramworks, and he makes these Pyrex replacement hoppers, and he can machine down for the base to fit on top of the dispenser, whatever, right? So he can make you anything. But I also found, because I'm not gonna, I don't need to fill up half a pound of powder to make 60, but I took the cap off of the top of that, and that fits perfectly right on top of my dispenser like this. So this is just how I'm going to use it, so I don't get anything in there. I can do 10 and add a little bit more or whatever, but I'm all set, ready to go now. Don't think I'm missing anything else. I got my calipers nearby. I'm going to double check one more time. I'll make one more dummy round because I set this up. Well, today's Monday morning. I set this up actually on Friday, and then I was busy with other things over the weekend. But this little dude, I tried to extract it, and then I started chewing it up with my vice grips, and I thought, I don't want to mess with this right. When you start getting frustrated with something, set it down and walk away. Come back when you're, a little bit more calm. But I'm glad I did because you got to see how that worked. And it's nice to have needle nose pliers or, like mini vice grips or something like that sitting around for odd jobs like that. That's why you keep a million little tools. Happy trails.